And then, of course, yeah, there's tons of people that are like, this is wrong, this is bad, only unhealthy people do this. And I don't blame them for thinking that. I mean, think about the movies and the TV shows that you see depicting kink. There is no love. There is very rarely a healthy, mentally sane person that's into kink. They're usually like came from abuse and trauma or whatever those things are. So it makes sense that people would feel like really resistant to it because they've only seen depictions of it being unhealthy and abusive and violent even.
Yeah. We're back, baby, with a brand new season of the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. Join us each week as we have unfiltered conversations about how to transform your life. Our mission is to usher in a new era of spirituality where you don't have to be all love and light to live a life of alignment. Here, we honor all of it, the profound and the profane, the magic and the messy, and all things that make you human. So let's discuss the truth behind transformation and be unapologetic in our evolution. From manifestation to money, embodiment to energy, and all taboo topics, nothing is going to be off limits. Are you ready to live a life that feels just as good as it looks? Let's get fucking spiritual. Welcome back to the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. I am so excited for our guest today. She is unlike any guest that we've ever had on the show. She is a professional dominatrix, a somatic therapist, an author, a speaker, and just an amazing human. I've had the privilege of getting to know her recently, and it was like immediate soul sister vibe, getting to drop in and she helps people heal their trauma through pleasure and desire. So Kimi Inch, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Don't forget, I'm also a motivational spanker.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I almost was going to have you do your intro because when we met at that party, I was like, she's got her intro to what she does down. And I would love for you to tell everyone, like, I know you're a professional dominatrix, but I'm sure a lot of people don't fully know what that means, what that looks like. Yes. So will you just like give us the lowdown on what it is that you actually do?
Thank you. Yeah. So I do sex positive edutainment, but essentially I feel like it's a bit more in depth than what people think a classic dominatrix does. Because I think a lot of people conjure up these thoughts of a leather clad bitch that beats up men for money. And, that's a very sort of stereotypical outlook on that work. But what I do essentially is help guide people through their fantasies. And I even go a step further. I actually consider myself more of a shamanatrix because I don't just do classic kinky sessions. What I do are actually conscious kink journeys to help people learn about themselves, maybe do some shadow work, face their demons, but also learn how to grow and expand through pleasure and through their desires. So yeah, I like to say I do more shamanatrix work, and I really love introducing people into learning what's possible in their erotic lives.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's really exciting because I've played around in this world a bit, but I know that there's a lot of people that have no idea or like, oh my gosh, that seems like something that's so taboo. And I know that you're all about the taboo. So
that's right.
Tell us a little bit about like how, on this show, we're all about healing and going into the depths of our soul. And we talk a lot, this season has been a lot about like nervous system regulation and somatic work. So tell us about like the intersection of how doing this work can be really healing for people. I would love to,
My pleasure. I do talk about transformation through the taboo. And for most people, our sexuality, our erotic beings is racked with a lot of taboo, shame, confusion. I know when I went to sex ed, I learned how not to get pregnant and not to get STDs. There wasn't really discussion around like, why do we have the desires we have? Why are we interested in certain erotic encounters over others? And, what's the emotionality and energetics of sexuality, And these are ideas and concepts that a lot of people don't really dive into. But essentially the belief is that our sexuality is, the core of our essence. I mean, I like to ask people like, did you come into this world as a result of sex? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, and have you ever had sex? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, so we all come from sex. Most of us are having sex. And yet there's so much inhibition around discussing the topic. So I really work with people who have done a lot of personal development work. They've done Tony Robbins, they've done all of these sort of things, and they've recognized that, wow, there's still so much more to discover. I really want to understand myself as a sexual being in this world. And I talk about working with Eros energy, and Eros energy is a Latin word, root for erotic, and that is our life force energy. So that's linked to our creativity, our power, our relationship to life. And essentially, I want to help people guide, inspire, and influence their own erotic energy or their partner's erotic energy or Eros energy, that life force energy. And when you understand that, that can be just so powerful and potent.
Yeah. I mean, it's the life force energy that's through all things, right?
Yes,
it's like when
of course.
you're helping people really wake up their being is what I feel like a lot of what it is that you're doing. At least that's been same for my journey as I've gone on this kind of like erotic journey. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much aliveness on the other side of this.
So true. And think about taboo, because a lot of people, I say kink, and immediately they're like whips, chains, that's kind of what comes to mind. But I say the definition of kink is actually being turned on by the taboo. So if you think about like what's taboo to an individual, it varies from person to person. Someone might think dirty talk is really taboo. Someone might think doggy style is really taboo. And that taboo nature, that naughty nature, is what creates that thrill and aliveness and excitement. The things like, ooh, we shouldn't be doing this, kind of creates that like thrill for people. And that is part of our Eros energy. So if we can embrace that part of ourselves, then we have options of learning how we can show up in it and choose how we want to channel it and create more abundance and fulfillment in our lives beyond the bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And that takes me into wanting to just ask, like, how did you get into this?
Oh, yes. People always ask, how did I become a dominatrix?
Yeah.
And I like to say it actually started when I was like 10 years old. And what was going on is that I was watching a really R-rated movie called Basic Instinct. And that's a movie with Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas. It's back in the 90s. And I was watching that movie with my mom, which is already kind of awkward, but I didn't have a lot of parental supervision, so I wasn't really censored in what I could watch. And I remember watching a scene in the movie where it was especially sexual and also violent, like they were slapping each other and tying each other up and scratching each other. And it was this really intense experience watching this, and I could feel my own turn on. But in that moment, my mom turned to me and said, "Hey, you should not be watching this." And I remember feeling this mix of turn on and arousal with shame and embarrassment. And my face was hot and my heart was racing and my genitals are tingling and my ears are ringing. And I was feeling this like real intense sense of aliveness, something that I had never experienced before as a kid. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, it feels so good doing things we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And I remember from that point forward, I was like, how do I recapture that feeling again? And I remember when I started having sex with my first boyfriend in high school, my first love, I immediately was like, oh my God, is this it? After 3 times of having sex with him. And I suggested like, hey, like, let's dress up and pretend to be different people. Let's tie each other up. Let's spank each other. Let's slap each other. And, he's 16 years old. So he's just happy to be having sex at all.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, he asked me, like, why do you need all this weird shit? And I didn't know why. I just wanted to feel that, like, mental, emotional, and physical, like, expansion, that was more than just an in and out sort of experience. I wanted more. And when I finally was a young adult, I was in my early 20s and living in Japan. I was DJing there. And I was asked by some party promoters if I would be interested in DJing at a fetish party. And I didn't know what a fetish party was, but I was like, sure, the price is right. I'll come and check it out. And as I'm there in this smoky club, because it was back in the day in the early 2000s, I looked across and I saw people in these like costumes and these latex and leather and priest outfits and schoolgirl uniforms and, military outfits. And just, it was a spectacle of people dressed in these interesting outfits. And they were having interactions of tying each other up and spanking each other and interacting in these erotic ways. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm kinky. Like these are my people. Like this is what I'm into. I'm interested in like stimulating all parts of our being. Mm-hmm. So I met women there who were professional doms, and they sort of took me under their wings and they showed me the ropes, so to speak. And the rest was history. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be able to be the queen and be the boss and get paid to take people through their fantasies. And after several years of that, I realized there was so much more that was possible. Like when I started doing my deep inner work on myself and facing my own shadows and my own demons, I started to recognize, wow, this is actually a sacred space where people can really express themselves in their most vulnerable ways, like ways that they don't share with their families or friends or partners. And sometimes they don't even tell their therapists about these things because of the shame and the taboo nature of it all. But here they can be themselves and express themselves. And I just recognize like, wow, there's so much healing through permission and human contact and acceptance and approval and celebration for our desires. Yeah. So that was something that I wanted to pursue more. I went back to school to become a somatic therapist and started learning about Tantra and combined all of those trainings and teachings into the healing modality that I do now through conscious kink.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a journey.
It has been.
What a journey.
It continues to be too. Yeah. It's such an amazing experience to see people learn that they actually have everything within themselves. They don't actually need anything outside of themselves to experience these expansive states of altered consciousness. You know, there's a lot of people promoting medicines like MDMA and psilocybin. And I think that's amazing, like such an amazing tool to help us open these doors that maybe we don't have access to. And I also think when you start diving into your own eroticism, you start to learn that you can have the same kind of expansive experiences that you get on MDMA and psilocybin, but it comes from within. It's your own internal medicine of Eros and learning that you can open your own doors. You don't need anything else. And that's such a powerful thing. I don't think the powers that be really want us to know just what we're capable of.
Yeah. I completely agree with you on that one.
I think, you know.
It's fucking spiritual. We've talked about it all on this show. That's really beautiful. And I love that you're bringing so much healing into this. And I really want to talk about how, like, what is even possible on the other side of this? Like, what have you seen, obviously without sharing too many details, but like of the way people have transformed? Because I'm sure people listening to this, like some of them might even be listening to this and think dominatrix or like BDSM, and shame immediately comes up. But like, so do you see people come to you like feeling a lot of shame? And then what's on the other side? Do you have any like stories or things that
I would love to share? You know, I've worked with literally thousands and thousands of clients around the world, and maybe about 4 years ago, an Egyptian man started to come and do sessions with me. He lived in America, but he was born and raised in Egypt, came from a Muslim culture. And he had come to me because he was like, I don't see the point of being alive anymore. Like, I am so unhappy and miserable. And as we were doing sort of this intake process that I do with all clients, I was learning that being raised in Egypt and in this Muslim culture meant that he really had to inhibit himself and his desires and what he was interested in. He, went to school to become a surgeon because that's what his parents wanted him to do. They had an arranged marriage for him, so he married the woman they wanted him to marry. They told him to move to America and become a successful doctor to send money back home. And he did everything he was told, and he was absolutely miserable. And so he had been harboring a lot of shame around his desires, like desires he's had since he was 10 years old. So I said, when we come in for the next session, I want to talk about your fantasies and get an understanding of what it is. So he comes in and he has this like thing that he wrote out, like this almost like novel that he's like, here it is. This is my fantasy that I've had for like my whole life, as long as I can remember, 30 years or so. And I look at his little paper that he wrote, and I handed it right back at him. And I said, read it to me. And he was like, oh, okay. And I was like, yeah, I want to hear you read it to me. So he starts reading it to me, and he's like, and then this happens. And I'm like, no, stop. I want you to read a couple sentences, and I want you to look me in the eye and see that I'm here with you in this moment. So this is already like really taboo and edgy for him. Not only just sharing this fantasy he's kept secret his whole life, but actually like reading it in detail and like taking me in as I'm witnessing him. And essentially the fantasy is about him being kidnapped by powerful, dominant women who take him to their lair, and they do whatever they want to him. They, spank him, they tie him up, they humiliate him, they make him go into a service mode so that he's serving them in any way they ask for. And I'm listening to this story, and I'm like, this is so interesting. And he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, I love how smart your body is and your mind is, because you've actually eroticized your own victimhood. And he was like, what? And I'm like, the last couple of sessions, all you've talked about is how you've been forced in doing the things that you didn't want to do, and for your parents, for your culture, for your religion. And here you are telling me about this fantasy of being forced into doing things you don't want to do. Don't you find that really interesting? And he was like, well, I am a victim. Like, I was born in Egypt. You don't know what that's like. And I'm Muslim. And I'm like, okay, like, let's strike a deal here. Because as someone who's a shamanatrix and somebody that takes this work further than the surface, I'm not interested in playing out people's unconscious belief systems. I'm not interested in being used to abuse people. So I'm happy to do the session completely as depicted your way the first time around. But the second time around, I want to do it my way. And he's like, okay, so we do it his way. It's an amazing experience for him. It's the first time he actually gets to live out his fantasy. And that's powerful in and of itself. So he's like, wow, that was amazing. That I feel so seen, and like I feel celebrated for my desires. That was so healing. So the next time he came a month later, I said, now we're going to do the exact same scene, but I want you to ask for everything. If you don't ask for it, I'm just going to stand here and look at you awkwardly. So you have to ask to be tied up. You have to be asked to be humiliated. You have to tell me what kind of words you want me to use to humiliate you. You have to ask me to spank you, et cetera, like every detail. You have to ask for it. And so we start the session and he is crying the entire time. And at the end of the session, when we're in aftercare, I was holding him in my arms and he was sharing that, like, I've never been able to ask for anything and then have it given to me. And that's the first time that's ever happened in my life. And if I can do that in this playroom, I want to do it in other places. I want to start asking for what I want. And sure enough, that was an empowering, bodily, visceral moment for him to have a different experience of life that we co-created together consensually and consciously. And he was able to feel it in his body, what it feels like to be courageous enough to ask for something and to be received and to be given what he wants. And after that day, I mean, he left his marriage and now he's able to express himself in an erotic way that feels really fulfilling. He wants to live. I mean, he had completely changed his outlook on life to be given an opportunity to have an experience where he could be in his pleasure while simultaneously facing the things that were actually standing in the way of what he truly wanted in this world. So I love using that as a healing modality because, again, you learn that you have all the power within you and it's fun and it's creative and you get to feel pleasure at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so powerful. And talk about a complete rewiring experience, right? Of like,
totally.
And how beautiful as the practitioner for you to like know where to take him. How did you know like that's where you wanted to take him? How did you know like, oh, okay, he needs to ask for what he wants? Like, or was that an intuitive thing? Or
There's elements of it being intuitive. And I also take a lot of time to go through an intake process to learn not just about someone's desires and boundaries, but to learn about what their initial impressions are of sex, of relationships.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really what brings us towards our desires. Like some people think our kinks and desires come from trauma.
Yeah.
I don't like that. There's no supportive evidence that claims that to be true. But I do think after working with so many clients, I do think there's impressions that we have about sex and intimacy and relationships that do influence our desires and what we want to experience erotically. So getting that information and really diving deeper with him, going beyond what's on the surface and pulling back the curtain and learning about him as a human and his human experience. Yeah. I want to infuse that personalization into our scene so that he can have like a really custom, like expansive experience. So yeah, it just takes listening and like diving deeper. Like anyone in listening to this can do this with their partner and getting curious, like, honey, like I want to know what turns you on. And if you tell me like, oh, I like the idea of spanking, and I can say like, well, you know, Rachel, like, do you like the idea of being this naughty schoolgirl? And like, I'm going to keep you after class. And if you don't receive your spankings, you're going to get expelled from school. And you know, you're going to get in a lot of trouble if you don't do a good job. Yeah. You could be like, I don't know if that feels good in my body. Or I could say like, what if I did it in a really tantric way? What if I said, my heart is my fourth chakra and my arms and hands are an extension of my heart. And your buttocks is actually your first chakra. So as I'm spanking you with my heart and I'm activating the place in your body that's related to security, safety, abundance, and wealth. and I'm opening that channel so that you can have more of that in your life. Is that the kind of spanking you might be interested in?
Wow.
So I can use it as a punitive punishment that's really cliche and stereotypical, or I could use it as a way of moving energy in your body and aligning your chakras so that you can be more in union with yourself.
Yeah,
so
wow.
You can do it either way.
I love this. Even my mind is like expanding in this moment. I'm like, okay, this is fun. This is really great.
It is.
And I want to go back to something that you said that I think is actually really important. And that is this idea that anybody that's into BDSM, kink, or things that are taboo comes from their trauma. What would you say? Because I think that's a common, thought process, right? So what would you say to people that are thinking that, and what is your take on it?
It's definitely not impossible. Like there is a possibility that there could be some big T or little t trauma that has influenced our desires, but the brain is super complex. Like it's a very complex machine and tool. So it's really hard to just classify something being trauma related. But I get curious when I'm working with clients around intention, because the difference between regular kink and conscious kink really does boil down to things like consciousness, embodiment, and intention. And like I mentioned before, I was reading a scenario from this man that was sort of playing out these belief systems around his own victimhood, which is okay, but I want to bring that into the light and get curious around what else is possible, because we could play this out with consciousness, and we could also take that and say, let's flip it on its head. Like, let's say you're a woman that's like, I'm always in these relationships with avoidant men and they never call me back. And I'm always like being ghosted and like, why do I keep, this pattern going? And I could say like, I could listen to you for the 20th time complaining about men, or I could be like, let's fucking do something about it.
Yeah.
Like, let's have an experience of maybe me dominating you in a way that I'm like going to tie you up and like tease you and like dangle the carrot in front of your face, but you're never going to get that carrot. But for some reason you're doing it in the relationships you get in, but maybe you need to actually feel it. Or maybe we'll totally flip the script and you'll dominate me and you'll tease me and you won't like let me have the carrot, and you get to feel what it's like to be on the other side of that coin, because it's all the same coin.
Yeah.
And what does that feel like in your body? Because ultimately you're choosing something that's familiar, and you can choose something different if you want. But most people don't know the experience of the different.
Yeah.
So we talk about these concepts all the time, like we talk about surrender, we talk about power, but how do you practice surrender? Like how do you practice power and consensual pain and dealing with resiliency? Like how do you actually create more resiliency in your nervous system? This is an opportunity to work with a partner and figuring out what's standing in the way of what I want, how do we eroticize it, and how do we play with these elements so that I can understand what it means to be in surrender. I can understand that I'm very resilient, and I can understand that I have choice and I get to decide how I want to navigate life.
Yeah.
So that is the idea of looking at whether this is a trauma or an unconscious belief that's at play, and bringing it into presence and looking at it as a way of like, how can I use this to expand and elevate my life?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'm like, the gears are turning in my head so much. So,
it's so fun because anything, what's possible is limited by your own imagination, Rachel. So like whoever you're with in a erotic encounter, like, you can just make it about the pleasure and the play and the fun and have all of that. Or if you want to say like, hey, like I'm noticing there's these patterns showing up in my life. Like I would love to play with these themes in an erotic sense, because it's all like these universal themes that we're experiencing. If you're not into whips and chains, that's cool. But on a daily basis, you're experiencing power dynamics all the time. And sometimes you're in the leadership position and sometimes you're in the followership position. And when you're conscious of that, you get to choose how you want to show up in it. Just like pain, people are like, why would you want to experience pain in an erotic setting? Like that seems really kind of unhealthy in a way. And it's like, well, we're talking about sensation and the intensity level of a sensation. And when you're in a safe environment and it's consensual and you're experiencing something that might be considered an intense sensation, all these chemicals get released in your brain, the oxytocin and the serotonin and the adrenaline and the endorphins, and it makes you high as hell. And so like being able to access that and know that like, wow, my body's actually really strong and knows how to process intensity helps you go out into the world and say like, I can handle this.
Right.
I got this. I know I've got this because I've actually put it to the test. I've actually put my body through experiences that were intense and that like required me to breathe through it and surrender and to like expand into it.
Yeah.
So I know I can handle this bullshit thing at my job. I know I can handle this like little conflict in my relationship because I've been able to like really understand how much I can hold.
Yeah.
You know? So it's really cool.
Yeah. You've had this like embodied experience of expanding your capacity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay. So I'm thinking if I'm somebody listening to this and I'm like, okay, how do I almost like, how do I use this to start to kind of heal either the limiting beliefs that I have or the things that are holding me back, the unconscious patterns that are at play. So say if somebody, has this belief that they are incapable or belief that they are not enough or something like that. Like how would they take that belief? So say, we do a lot of people that listen to the show have done a lot of the like journaling and belief work and all the things. And so did I, visualization, all of that, the manifestations.
Yes.
And then I realized like that is not enough. And that's how I got into the somatic work and like doing more nervous system work. And that's why the season 2 of the show is talking about this, which is great.
Yes.
And, I know a lot of people are sitting here going, I'm really self-aware and yet I'm still stuck. And so if they are self-aware of those unconscious beliefs, then what can they do? Say if they're in the bedroom, like can they start to use these principles to flip this and like expand their own capacity? Yes. What would that look like?
I think it's really cool to start getting curious around like if there's an upset happening and getting curious around like, well, what is the story that's running here? Like what am I telling myself? What am I making up about this? And how am I a contribution to the reality of my life? Because life doesn't happen to me, it happens from me, right? So if I'm going to look at a situation where like I don't feel recognized at work and my boss is a jerk and this and that, and I can get really curious around like, well, how am I participating in this idea of me being a masochist or maybe me being submissive? And how can I like look at that as a way of empowerment? So like I like to joke and tell people, you have a friend that you can call at the drop of the dime and like, share your complaints with and they're going to listen to you. But I like to do it like a step further. Like I have friends in my life that I call spanking sisters. And there's no sexual exchange happening between us. It's just purely supportive sisterhood. And I'll call a girlfriend and I'll be like, I've had a really rough week. I feel so out of touch of my body. I feel like really emotionally congested and constipated. I also feel like, I'm forgetting who I am. Can you just come over and spank the shit out of me? Can you like bring me back into my body with intention and like love and like, not in a sexual erotic way. I mean, it's erotic because it's erotic Eros energy, but it's not like a sexual thing. And I'll have a girlfriend come over and spank me and bring me back into my body because I'm not going to be thinking about the meeting I have tomorrow or like, other responsibilities I have if I'm having a really good spanking. Yeah. Meanwhile, as I'm getting brought into my body, these chemicals are getting released and I'm starting to have an altered state of consciousness. And when you're in an altered state of consciousness, your perception changes of things, like things shift. You feel a sense of oneness. You feel unconditional love. You remember your connection to source and to all. It's just like any plant medicine that you would do. And from that place of being fully in my body and in an altered state of love and connection, I can see things from a different lens. And then I can understand like, wow, I can actually drop into my creativity here because my ego and pride are really running the show right now. And doing something like getting spanked by someone is like an ego death, really, like when you think about it, because it's very unusual. And your body's like, what's happening? As my friends are spanking me, they could also be like, I want you to look in the mirror and I want you to listen as I spank you that you are enough. You are beautiful. You deserve pleasure. I want you to say it to me now. Tell me how amazing you are. And as my body's receiving these like really intense sensations, my brain is saying like, this is not normal. This is something to pay attention to. That's why ritual is so important in how we can create more depth in our lives, because our brains know that ritual is not the norm. Ritual and these sort of interactions are actually really special. There's something to take note here, and it creates an opening in our subconscious to have a different idea of something. Yeah. So like all of these, like neurologically speaking, energetically speaking, spiritually speaking, there's so many things happening simultaneously. And all that happened was I called a homegirl to say like, hey, can you just spank me and like say that I'm amazing and like remind me of who I am and bring me back into my body. And it can be just as simple as that. Honestly, like a complete reset of the system. And I might cry because that intensity level might break down some of the defensive systems I've built up to try to survive and make it through the week. And it just all crumbles. And I just, just let it all out and empty so that I can be that empty vessel to allow what I want more of in this world back into myself, So
wow.
that's
I love
just one
that.
example.
That's fun.
You don't have to be in a committed relationship. Like you could have friends and talk to them about like, hey, could you move energy in my body? You don't need to get a massage therapy license to do this. You can just, you can just spank me and it will help me drop back into myself and it will open up these channels for me.
So amazing. Have you always been this open and just like allowing yourself to be seen? Or was there ever a time?
So I haven't. When I first worked as a dominatrix, I was living a double life. It was kind of fun at first because I was like, oh, by night I'm a DJ, by day I'm a dominatrix. And my own boyfriends didn't know that I was doing this work because I was so afraid of being judged and shamed and rejected, just like so many people are. But I guess like 5 years into it, I was like, what am I hiding for? Like, I actually feel like I'm doing good in this world. I feel like I'm helping people and I'm like getting paid to be creative and do these things. Like I didn't want to hide it anymore. So when I started to come out of the closet or come out of the dungeon, if you will, most of the time people were just curious around like, well, what does that mean? Is that sex work? And I'm like, it is actually classified as sex work, but only because I'm working with sexual energy and Eros energy. I don't get fully nude. I don't participate in any genitally focused interactions with anyone. It's not about that. So kink is not necessarily sexual. It depends on the people playing if they want to add in the element of sex, but it doesn't have to be sexual whatsoever.
Wow. Okay. I love that. Yeah.
I think it's cool because it's almost the antithesis of hookup culture. If somebody wants to have an intimate experience with someone, they think the only avenue for that is sex, which could be a one-night stand or something casual. And with kink, you can have an in-depth, erotic, expansive, orgasmic even exchange that never has to release the genitals or never has to include penetration of any kind. So people can actually have that kind of interaction, but not have to, be penetrated or have to have sex at all.
Yeah.
And that could be really cool.
Did you experience backlash from anyone when you did share?
You know who I got the most backlash from when I started teaching was the kink community itself.
Oh, wow.
They were the first to really come after me because they didn't like that I was teaching people about kink. Like I wanted to show people this isn't the scary world you think it is. There's actually a lot of possibility here. And they didn't like that I was teaching the civilians like about kink because they held it really sacred and they thought that I wasn't keeping the meaning as clean as I was intending to. So really like the kink community itself was very upset that I was talking about kink and how to bring kink into your life and how to spice things up in the bedroom, but go beyond just spicing it up in the bedroom. And then of course, there's tons of people that are like, this is wrong, this is bad, only unhealthy people do this. And I don't blame them for thinking that. I mean, think about the movies and the TV shows that you see depicting kink. There is no love. There is very rarely a healthy, mentally sane person that's into kink. They're usually like came from abuse and trauma or whatever those things are. So it makes sense that people would feel like really resistant to it because they've only seen depictions of it being unhealthy and abusive and violent even.
Yeah.
So it makes sense why people hold those belief systems. But I'm hoping that we can start shifting that and letting people know like, no, actually this is just your biology and how you can expand with your own biology and your own imagination. And that's pretty freaking cool.
Really cool. Yeah. I love that. And I think there's just so many misconceptions and I love that you're bringing this to light and making this more, it's funny to hear that the kink community would think that because I would think like we need more people in this. Like we know how healing it is. But that I actually had a couple friends that who shall remain nameless that came to your event who are married and just raved about it after. And
I'm so glad.
The woman, I'm good friends with her and she, had come to me and said like, I actually don't let myself go in these spaces because she even had this idea of like these spaces, not that they're like dirty, but more so like the, like they're going to be unsafe. Thank you. Like there's not going to be like it's not going to be consensual, or it's going to be creepy, or there's going to be like these things. And she was like, Kimmy held the safest, cleanest space of anything I've ever seen, in the way that she, holds the container and holds the consent. And like she said, it was just the safest that she had ever felt.
Oh.
And I love that. And I got to even experience that and witness that from the party that we met at, right?
Yes.
Or even just like the small workshop you did, and you make it so approachable and so accessible for people, and also feels like a very safe environment because of the energy in which you're holding it, which I think is so beautiful. And so I want to acknowledge you for that.
Thank
first
you.
off. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so passionate for me, and not all events and classes and, even play parties are the same, right?
Yeah.
And I was just recently, like maybe 6 months ago, at a convention called DomCon, and DomCon has been around for years and years and years. And it's a place where people can explore kink. And I went to one of their play parties, and it was just like I remembered when I first entered the kink scene. It was very cliche. It was dark. It was like brr, 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 like really like intense EDM music. Somebody's getting whipped on the stage. Everybody's like kind of scowling, and like nobody's laughing and having fun. And I was like, this is the cliche like kink that people associate that world with. But what I'm trying to do is infuse the somatic healing aspect, the tantra, the light, the shadow, all of it all in one, so that you can decide what sort of adventure you want to pick for yourself.
Yeah, really beautiful. And so if somebody's listening to this and maybe they've had like vanilla sex life for most of it, but they have a lot of like ideas and things that are wrapped up in maybe the shame, but they want to start exploring this maybe in their partnership. How can they start to like even dip a toe in? What does that look like? How do you work with those couples?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say I have a tool called the Kink checklist that I'm going to give the link so your guests can and listeners can download it. Yeah. It's free, but it's basically a list of possibilities. And I really recommend, even if you're in a relationship, to maybe take it to yourself and look through these lists of possibilities and notice what comes up in your body as you go through it. Is there intrigue? Is there fear? Is there excitement? And going through that list and getting familiar with like getting and connected to your body and noticing where you're at, And when you start to think about like, I want to try something out, remember everything is on a spectrum. Like so often people might see something like spanking on a kink checklist and they're like, oh, I guess that's really hardcore and it's going to be painful. But no, it doesn't have to be. You can do it really light, really sensual. I've spanked someone with a feather before. Like I have actually used furs and silks and things that have been really soft and super sensual. And I've done something like dirty talk, which people think could be light. I could do really hardcore humiliation and do that really intensely. So just remembering, like listening to your body, keeping yourself tuned into like what's happening within yourself, and knowing that you get to decide what the pinky toe in the shallow end of the pool is. Like, so you and your partner can go through this list together. You can pick out like maybe the two or three activities you might be interested in exploring. And before you even crack out a flogger or ropes, you could actually just like sit and lay with your partner holding each other and describe in great detail a scenario that would feel like an ultimate scenario. Like I'm imagining walking into the house and you're standing there in your suit and you come up to me and you kiss me on the forehead and you tell me I've been such a good girl and that you're going to take care of me tonight. So you ask me to slowly undress in front of you. And you can start saying this scenario to your partner and notice like, is this expanding us, or is there ways that there's ideas that are contracting us? And that way we can have a little test drive before we actually like jump into something. So our body's getting a chance to titrate and to feel safe with our partner and feel like, okay, we're really clear on where our hell yeses are and our hell no's are. Yeah. And then we can maybe start to play with it, and we can say like, let's play for 10 minutes. Like, let's try this activity for 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes, and know that we can stop it at any time and we can call a timeout at any time. But we can find these ways to move slowly so we're not leaving any parts of us behind. We get to be fully embodied in the experience, and we get to feel empowered on how it can look, and know that we'll have another opportunity to try this again in the future. So yeah, I really recommend exploring within yourself and getting tuned into your own body to see what you're a fuck yes to. And then from there, finding ways to go slow and to titrate and to move through this and build intensity slowly so that you feel like you can understand the process of it all. So so really going slow, communication and tuning in is so important.
Yeah. And what happens if two people have two conflicting
Happens.
Yeah.
Right?
blueprints?
Yeah, it totally happens. So it gets curious around like, where's the middle ground? You know, like if somebody's really interested in being energetic and playing with energy and keeping it really soft and light, and another person's like, let's throw on the hoods and like, let's get the whips out. Like, I am excited. Figuring out that middle ground of like, okay, like let's start at the slowest or most shallow end of the pool and see how that exchange goes. Because most often the idea of something is way scarier than the actual reality of something. And of course, there are scenarios where maybe something should have remained a fantasy. It wasn't as good in real life as it was in my head, right? But being able to work with your partner and say like, okay, I want to find our fuck yeses and play with our fuck yeses. I don't want to try to change your no or maybe into a yes. I'd rather focus on the fuck yeses, build trust, build rapport. And then when we start to feel like we're available maybe for something that could be a little more intense or maybe look a different way, we can work with that down the road. But you really got to start with what's available and what's in the here and now, and then see if it can evolve. Because usually things evolve. The more you know yourself and the more safe you feel with your partner, it evolves and you're available for more, experiences.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I'm just imagining some of the women listening to this right now might even be like, what if I don't even know my fantasies? Like, what if I don't even know what I want?
Yes.
What would you tell them?
Yeah. I think, again, this is an opportunity to get really curious about your own mind. Like I ask people, what are some of your desires and fantasies? And they're like, I don't think I have any.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, have you ever seen anything in a movie or a TV show or in a book that was like, that made me feel a certain type of way, and get curious around what were some of the elements of that activity. Was there something in the energy, like maybe the man felt really dominant and in control and like the woman could just relax and surrender? Was that something that felt exciting to you? Or was it the opposite? Was it like, when this woman was like, I want you to do what I tell you to do, there was something in that made your, butterflies in your stomach set off, and getting curious around those little things. Again, when you have the kink checklist and you're going through the list of possibilities, you can start to get curious around like, how do I feel about maybe being restrained? Like what comes up for me when I think about maybe, having some restraints on my wrists and not being able to move, or maybe to move freely? Does that feel exciting to me? Does that feel like something that would be nice? Because then I don't have to be in charge all the time and I get to just lay there, start like really getting curious about yourself, because this is a side of yourself that holds so much potency and energy and juice. So to not have access to it, I don't really feel like people are living a full life almost. Like I feel like when we deny this part of ourselves, or when we don't cultivate it or give it attention, we move through life only like half human. So it's like, how do we get to have all parts of ourselves? How do we get to celebrate and embrace all parts of ourselves? Because in our wholeness anything is possible.
Yeah. And being lit up and alive. And I would imagine like, just like that man, right? It's like the creativity that probably comes on the other side of that, the self-confidence that comes on the other side of that is probably a mirror for so many other areas of your life. And it's like you get to have this place that expands you and expands your capacity, that you can go out and be, somebody new in the world.
It's great. I mean, I feel like people play so small in their lives, but especially in their sex lives, especially if you're just keeping all of that imagination and pleasure and juice in the bedroom. What a shame. Like, why not infuse your creativity and imagination and pleasure into your work, into your family life, into your relationships? It doesn't have to be sexualized, but it's that, again, that Eros energy, that aliveness that we have access to, that turn on. Like, let's be turned on by life, not just be turned on in the bedroom, but let's be turned on by waking up in the morning and being like, fuck yeah, like I hope this day fucks me wide open. And I hope I get to experience that and help other people feel like they have permission and inspiration to be their full selves as well.
Yeah, and I imagine it's
juicy.
a natural byproduct too of just like people getting, as you continue to expand your awareness and like try different things, it's like, I can't imagine the way that just changes your life. And I would love to hear, like, I really loved to hear the one story. Do you have any other like really juicy stories for us?
Girl.
I'm sure you have like
Do you
a
know who
million.
you're talking to?
I know.
How much time do we have here?
I know, right?
I have lots of juicy stories. So I'd love to tell one about a couple that I was working with. And they had been together for like 20 years. So they had been in a relationship for a while. And they were like a lot of couples that have been in long-term relationships, wanted to spice things up. And they wanted to play with kink. So as they were doing this on their own, they noticed that they just kept bumping heads and they kept like getting into conflict, and there was ruptures, and there was just ways that they just didn't know how to navigate. So they came to see me and they shared like, you know, the woman really wanted to be in her surrender and her submission and be in the follower role, while the man really wanted to be in his power and be in the control, dominant leadership role. And so after doing some intake sessions and getting to know their relationship a bit better, we started doing a scene where she was on a spanking bench, which means that it's almost like this like little bench that you can put your head down and just receive the sensation that he wanted to give her. So he's spanking her bottom. I'm there witnessing and holding space for them. And she starts interjecting. She's like, "That was too soft. Can you go harder? That was a little low. Can you go higher? Can you like rub in between? That was a little too hard. Go a little softer. I like it when you do this." And she like kind of kept, you know, interjecting her voice. And I can notice the guy is getting really frustrated. I can see he's like spanking her and his breath is starting to tighten and his jaw is like really tight. And I'm like, okay, like let's take a time out. I want to check in. You know, I asked the man, like, how are you doing? And he's like, well, she's always taking my power. Like, this is what happens. I'm spanking her and she starts telling me what to do. I'm not in charge anymore. I'm basically her puppet doing whatever she tells me to do. And I don't like it. I don't like how she takes my power like this. And so I said, okay. And it's funny because she's like, well, I want to use my voice and you're not inside my body. So how do you know? Like, how else can I tell you? And my voice is important here, right? So I tell them to take a deep breath and I ask them, you know, before we started this, we had intentions here. So can you tell me what your intention was? What did you say in the beginning of this? And he's like, my intention was for depth and intimacy and to have pleasure. And I'm like, okay. So what I'm noticing is that something's getting in the way of you being in your intention. And I think it's your ego. And I think that your ego believes she's taking your power, but that's not possible because true innate power can't be taken. It can only be given. So you're giving your power away to this person and it's upsetting you that you're giving your power away. And there are literally thousands and thousands of ways you can meet this scenario. So like what could be another way you can meet this scenario besides just getting all upset and your ego getting bruised? You know, and he's like, well, I guess I could have called a timeout and said like, hey, I'm noticing that it doesn't feel like you're in surrender and you're sort of telling me what to do and it doesn't feel good in my body. Can we talk for a moment and check in? And I'm like, totally. You totally could have done that. Also, you could have said like, oh, you have a lot to say. Like actually like raise your head and look me in the eyes. I want you to say all the things that you want to say, baby. And when you're done, you're going to put your head down. You're going to close your eyes and take a deep breath. And you're going to know that I've got you. Do you understand? He could have said that. Or he could have just been spanking her and said like, I love when you use your voice. What else? What else? What else? Keep telling me more, until he wore her the fuck out with the requests and the instructions until she had nothing left to give and just had to surrender from that point. Like there's literally thousands of ways he could have met that experience. And what had happened is, you know, the killer of Eros is ego, essentially. So when our ego gets bruised, we lose the ability to be curious and creative. So he lost his ability to be curious and creative in that moment and was just getting huffy and puffy because his agenda wasn't being realized on how it was supposed to look instead of being in whatever was showing up in the moment. So when he dropped back into his heart and decided to like come back to his intention for depth and intimacy, it completely changed the way he navigated the scene and he completely stepped into his true power, not the stereotypical power of what a dom's supposed to look like, but the way that it really looked for him in his relationship. And it completely opened them up in this new way where she could really actually feel held and safe with him and feel like she didn't need to instruct because she knew that he had her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
That's so good. I'm like, oh, a lot of people need to listen to that one. That's such a good story. Wow.
Yeah. But, it was interesting because I remember, he's like, he's taking my power, and I was like, but I think about in life, like how often does that happen in our lives?
Yeah.
Like something will happen, my ego gets bruised, and I'm like, oh, fuck you, instead of like being in curiosity and creativity where maybe that could have been shifted into a completely different scenario. But my ego got in the way and I wasn't able to have another experience that could have been more expansive. Yeah. So it happens all the time. But when we practice it in the playroom and we get a feel for what that looks like through practice, we go out into the world and we have it just in our bodies already because we know how to be creative and curious.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like being the artist of your own experience and being able to direct it. And that's, wow. And that's so hot too, when someone's in their power and that's exactly right. Not giving it away. And what I'm also hearing too is like some existential kink inside of that, this 100%, book, right?
Yeah.
And do you use that? It sounds like that.
Her book came out. I mean, I had been doing this work for over 20 years, but when her book came out, I was like, oh my fucking God, yes, queen.
Yes.
Like, I loved how she verbalized these unconscious ways that were kinky as fuck.
Yeah.
And when we bring it into consciousness, like how we get to have so much more pleasure and play around it. And then we can actually shift it because it doesn't have a hold on us anymore. Right. We're not like submissive to our desires or our curiosities or to our sense of security. Like we get to like really lean into the uncomfortable and know we're going to be fine. We know how to navigate the unknown.
Yeah. And for people listening to this, if they don't know what existential kink is, from my understanding and the way I've used it in my life is like all the unconscious things that we think that we don't want, we're choosing. So it's like, oh, I actually like love that I'm giving away my power here. And I love that I feel like incapable of this thing. And I love that I don't feel like, it's like flipping it on its head, right? And like making a kink out of the things that we say that we don't want.
100%. It's like a really sexy shadow work.
Yeah, really sexy shadow work.
Where you can be orgasmic if you want, which is so cool because instead of letting the fear take over, just fuck the fear. Like literally fuck the fear with your Eros life force energy and have it shift into something else.
Wow. This is a really good reminder for me in my own life.
Yes,
even currently. So thank you.
You're so
always.
welcome.
Yeah, it's
You're
beautiful.
So welcome.
And I know you've got a 4-day event.
I do.
Coming up. Tell us about that a little bit and what it looks like.
Yes. So our 4-day event is called Something More, and it's I would say beginner to intermediate for people interested in really diving deep and understanding their desires and boundaries better. We are going to explore communication and attunement. We're also going to have a guest speaker talk about the erotic blueprints so you can really understand what your turn-ons are and how to meet your partner's experiences. We're also going to talk about an experienced shibari and an impact play. We have our own private play party where people can really integrate and put into practice the things they learn over the 4 days. And then on the last day, we have like a gratitude circle and a decompression aftercare day where people can really process and integrate everything that they learned. It's such a beautiful, expansive experience with people who are just interested in expanding their erotic intelligence. And people who are erotically intelligent are some of the coolest people in the world. So it's about erotic intelligence and having permission to really expand into the fullness of who you are and have a lot of fun while you do it. So that's in June. It's the first weekend in June. Would love to, give your guests and listeners a link for that access through you. And would love to have people join us. We still have about 50% of the tickets left. So
okay, amazing. I'm definitely even interested in going to that too.
Please let me corrupt you. Please drink my kinky Kool-Aid.
I'll have to get a Kimmy spanking.
Yes, of course. I want to be spanking sisters.
Okay, great. Let's do it. Okay. I would love that. I would love that. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
This is so fun to talk about. I feel like I could talk to you about this and take it so many different directions. I'm like, I'll have to have you back. Yeah, next time. But where can everyone find you?
Yes. So you can find me on all the socials through my name, Kimi Inch, KimiInch. And then my website is andmorepresents.com. And that has all the information for my events and offerings that are coming up. So I do events, I do private coaching, I do online classes, all kinds of things.
Great. Amazing. Well, I'm excited to dive even more into your world and get to know you more and all of this. And yeah, we'll have everything in the show notes for you guys. So definitely go check out Kimmy. And Kimmy, thank you so much for being on, sharing your wisdom. And yeah, check out the event in June for sure. We'll have the link in the show notes for you guys. Yeah, thanks. Oh, so fun. Thank you for coming on.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for listening to the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. I am so glad that you're here. And if this episode resonated with you, I invite you to share this with a friend that you feel needs to hear it. And if you are really feeling the love and support for this show, this podcast thrives off of your listens and your reviews. So I would love if you could leave us an honest review. We would love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your questions, and it helps us get this podcast in the hands of more people and would mean so much to me to receive your support. So thank you.